Thanks for that, Salona. SIAM, the auto industry's apex body, is holding its annual convention in Delhi. Top industry experts are attending the event. Ruchi is now joining us from the capital to take us through the mood this time around. Ruchi?
Well, yes, we are here at the annual SIAM convention in the capital today, which was attended by a host of industry leaders from Carl Slim, Pawan Goenka, Rahul Bajaj, Rajiv Bajaj, Vinod Dasri, host of people from Mahindra and Mahindra, but nothing too positive to report from here. In fact, the day kick-started on a somber note, with the Minister Praful Patel, the Minister of Heavy Industries, in fact, acknowledging the fact that the industry has been witnessing a slowdown and the fear of job loss is something that even they are worried about now. However, one thing that he said, which is something that the auto industry could look forward to, is the fact that the heavy industries minister in fact wants to plan and go ahead and set up a meeting with the finance minister P. Chidambaram to look if a stimulus package could be worked out for the auto industry.
I am in constant touch with the government and the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister, and I am also going to, in the days to come, arrange a meeting of the entire auto industry, SIAM and other stakeholders with the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister to be able to express the concerns of the industry, and I'm sure we will find a way forward.
That was the Minister of Heavy Industries, Praful Patel, talking. But we have also spoken to a lot of managements, the management of Tata Motors, Bajaj Auto, Mahindra and Mahindra, and everyone pretty much acknowledging the fact that the auto industry has come to a screeching halt. We've seen that the auto numbers have been slumping for the past 8 months. It's the high fuel cost as well as the high interest rate that's actually ruining the consumer sentiment in the auto industry. And everyone feels that until and unless some dramatic steps are taken and something is done by the government, there will be no revival in the auto industry.
In absence of any stimulus package, industry current scene to turn back is going to be a difficult task. My personal view is actually unless and until stimulus package comes through, industry is going to go through difficult scene.
While I can't talk about the overall auto sector, let me talk a little bit about the commercial vehicle sector. See, the commercial vehicle sector runs primarily as along with the GDP. If the GDP is growing, the commercial vehicle sector grows. Unfortunately, the GDP is not doing so well, and nor is it looking like it's going to come back to the 7 to 8% range anytime soon. However, the government is doing 2 or 3 things which are beneficial to us. Firstly, the JNNURM2 scheme that the government has announced. We're hoping that the orders will start to come in from October, and hopefully the deliveries will start sometime in December or January. And since that is only on buses, and we are the 4th largest bus manufacturer and we are the market leader in the country, we hope to get a substantial share of that, and that would give us a little fillip.
We would have expected that at this point we should be starting to move up from the cycle and the CV industry perspective. Unfortunately, what's happened is that with all the economic gloom which is going on, the down cycle has sort of continued for a bit. So our hopes that the festive season which is coming up now, it would really spur CV sales. It could still do, but it may be a bit more muted than what we'd imagined earlier.
But there are others like Rahul Bajaj who in fact feel that the burgeoning fiscal deficit may not allow the government to really go ahead and announce any stimulus package. We've seen that the government is already struggling with a high spending, and in such a scenario the auto industry will have to deal with the current slowdown and in fact go ahead and find out other ways that they can take to get the growth trajectory back on track.
I unfortunately don't expect any favorable or positive changes on the macroeconomic front till the next elections, whether they are the parliament elections latest by May 2014 or maybe if they prepone it, I have no idea. All kinds of talk going on. I would bet on the fact that there is not going to be a preponement, but preponement means in November with the state elections. After that, a lot of things will take place, hopefully, even whatever the kind of government is. Even a third front government is better than the present situation. The credibility has been lost with the present thing. Well-meaning ministers, well-meaning Prime Minister, but the credibility is very poor.
All right, joining us on the show is Mr. Sandilya, President of SIAM. Mr. Sandilya, thanks for joining us. Now, we've seen how growth numbers have come to a screeching halt, Mr. Sandilya. GDP shocker in particular, and the auto industry has also clearly not escaped that trend. What, according to you, is the solution really going forward? Mr. Sandilya, can you hear me?
See, the point is that unless the economy grows and it grows at a reasonable pace, the question is who can get the economy? A little bit, yes, but not very well. Can you hear me? Am I audible? Then you go ahead with your questions and I can just answer. It's okay.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Sandilya. Please go ahead.
I got your question, so I'm answering your question.
Yes.
All right, can I continue? Yeah, I think what you asked the question is regarding the current situation of the economy and the current state of affairs, and also the impact on the auto industry. Is, of course, it's not at all comfortable, and I think till such time the overall economy starts on the growth path, the auto industry will continue to have this problem. I think fundamentally the current situation, it cannot happen unless the government takes some positive steps, which is, even without waiting for any major steps, the current policies that have been announced either in the infrastructure or whatever we have in the mining sector, if we implement them at a reasonable pace, I think things will start turning around. And that's, I think, very critical. For example, on the case of roads and other ports, they have announced a lot of policies. The government sees to the issue that infrastructure needs to be kind of built up. But however, it's getting stuck in procedural hassles in terms of making clearances, the negotiations are getting stuck, companies are withdrawing from the PPP projects and so on. So I think we need to address some of these issues very, very squarely. Now, specifically to auto industry, what we believe can be done is one of the suggestions that we made to the government is on the fleet modernization scheme. People look at it from an angle as to will it involve certain amount of revenue loss. My take on that is very simple. It's very positive from all angles. There are four major benefits that we can think of fleet modernization. First of all, when you modernize this fleet and scrap the old vehicles, not let them ply in some rural area after being removed from the cities, but they are actually scrapped, and you start getting new vehicles. New vehicles are far more fuel efficient. Therefore, to that extent, your fossil fuel consumption would be under control. Second issue will be on emission. All these 15-year-old, 10-year-old vehicles have far lower emission standards. So today's emission standards are much better, much tighter. And if you get new vehicles coming into the market, you will definitely have better control on the emission. The third one is specifically from auto industry perspective. If the old vehicles get scrapped and new vehicles get sold, the volumes go up, there is a growth seen. When auto industry grows, it brings in positive sentiments, positive environment, so people will start making more investments. There will be some sentiments would get into the right mode. The fourth thing, which is more significant, I would say last but not the least, is revenue. Government looks at it, is it going to be a revenue loss? No, the incentive given is going to be positive in a way, because today the vehicles are not getting sold, or much less vehicles getting sold. If you have a scheme of this nature, more vehicles will get sold. That means at least you get positive revenue. A little bit of incentive being thrown in will only be a marginal amount with respect to the newer vehicles getting sold, the higher revenue coming in. So all four benefits that we talk about is extremely positive. This does not need any major thing except to do a mindset change in thinking that we have to have schemes which are implementable. We must ensure this scrappage scheme is positive, like what they did in Europe in terms of the cashback linker scheme. Ensure that there's proper systems and procedure to scrap the vehicle. Once it is scrapped, get a scrap certificate so that you get the incentive. Don't give incentive unless you produce proof of scrapping. So if you do all that, I think that's one kind of thing can be done. Second thing, the government has announced JNNURM scheme, very nice, 10,000 vehicles can be bought, buses can get sold, but it needs to be implemented. After all, the orders have still not been placed. It was announced during the budget time. 6 months have gone down. So I think at the moment what we understand is the specifications have been finalized, but yet orders have not been placed. The government should move fast in terms of finalizing whatever needs to be done, float the tenders, place the orders so that companies will start delivering vehicles. It is not that companies have vehicles in stock and they can give it to you tomorrow. It will take a year and a half to implement the entire volume of 10,000 buses. But at least there is a movement, there's a start. People, once they have the orders in hand, you'll immediately find there's an activity spurt that takes place. So some of these things that can be done even the current circumstances, I think election, no election, I don't think it has to wait for all that. We can start implementing them today and it can straight away have positive impact on the auto industry. And once that happens, then I think auto industry, as we know, is a growth driver for the economy. And the economy will also start growing. So I think it's a question of chicken egg problem. We need to take and start somewhere and not hold back on our actions.
Ms. Sandhya, the other important part which we've always been hearing from the industry's point of view regarding rate cuts and the way interest rates actually pan out in the country, looking at the current situation, looking at the kind of crisis mode that we are in on the larger scale, it looks unlikely there could be any rate cuts. How is that hurting the industry?
You see, put it this way, interest rate cut is not the major issue, barring the commercial vehicle segment where they could have an impact. For example, for the passenger vehicles and motorcycles, others, 25 basis points here and there is not going to make a major difference. However, yes, the interest rates being high because of inflation being high is what is hurting the people because they don't have enough income, because the kind of income that gets, a disposable income that is there for buying consumer durables obviously gets less when the inflation is high. So it's a combination of the overall inflation being high and consequent of that the interest rate being high is having an impact. So, but if you look at it from a commercial vehicle point of view, yes, it does make a significant difference because the interest cost is a significant part of the operating cost of the fleet operator. To that extent, he would find the pinch, so unless the interest rates come down. But I think in order that the interest rates come down, I think we have to also ensure that overall steps that the government is taking for fiscal deficit control has to be properly done. And that's an area where I think there is a lot that can be done by the government, apart from talking about, curbing import of gold or increasing duties out there and so on.
Right.
It's only one kind of action, but we have talked about austerity measures, the government cutting expenditure. They have banned vehicle purchase, but there are lots of other wasteful expenditure that takes place in the government. And why don't they address when, you see, what you talk and you must implement it. And I think government, the way I understand is, I'm
Mr.
not
Sandhya,
necessarily an expert to talk about the subject, but what we see in the public domain in terms of government expenditure, we don't see any major steps being seen. It must be visible. People must feel that there is an austerity measure being taken by the government.
Mr. Sandhya, I'm afraid we're running
We
out
don't
of...
see visible signs.
Absolutely. Take your point. Just briefly, Mr. Sandhya,
Can you hear me?
Yeah, the forecast that SIAM has for FY14, do you see that changing given the current situation, given spiraling costs as well for the industry? If you could just run us through very briefly the forecast that SIAM is maintaining for the fiscal. Yeah, so normally we give a forecast only once a quarter, but the last quarter we refrained from giving a forecast because the kind of volatility of the industry, we decided not to give any forecast for the current fiscal because situation is very volatile, changing at a very fast pace and very difficult for us to comment, because things like two-wheeler industry, which is growing, has also started doing a decline, and commercial vehicles have a very heavy decline, cars are in a decline. So under the current circumstances, we feel that giving any kind of forecast is only not going to help at all, and we have stopped giving forecast because it's not possible to predict.
I just wanted to come in on one more aspect when we talk about the industry, the cost factor itself. The reason I ask you this is because looking at the size of the auto industry, it has both the exports as well as the imports itself. Now, looking at the way the currency is actually played out in the last couple of months, what kind of a hit has it actually played out, or rather, how has it actually played out when we talk about the auto industry?
Yeah. See, for example, on the export front, you do see some positive signs, and the companies are able to export more vehicles because obviously from a outside country, their import perspective, the cost become worthwhile. Therefore, the rupee depreciating has helped the export industry. However, from the manufacturing sector point of view, it is not very good wherever the companies have to import material. But the positive side of that is that in case the imports become more expensive, it only forces the companies to start looking at local manufacturing, local content increase, which means the indigenization efforts will have to be boosted up, which will mean the local manufacturing will get a boost automatically because the cost can be controlled. But it cannot happen overnight, but the companies will start evaluating why not manufacture locally instead of importing these parts, and therefore, because the